Hi, I'm Lori Sharonbrock, and I'm here today with Chris Schucker of Digital Horizons, and we're trying to help educate you guys on the best in home technology. And today I want to talk about home theaters and home media centers. I know that's kind of we've always said a home theater, and we kind of have a different vision of what that is, but why should we start thinking about it in terms of being a media center rather than just a theater system?
So theater rooms are still definitely a thing. We don't work with them as much in this area. And usually the feedback that we get from clients is that if it's a second home, of course, most of the theaters that we actually work on are for primary residences, which makes sense because they're spending most of their time here. And that's usually the motivation or lack of motivation for somebody that has a second home in this area and not wanting a dedicated theater room is that they want to incorporate everybody that is up at the lake, theoretically. And unless you have a large theater room, and we're talking, 20 to 30 feet long by 20 to 24 feet wide, like a big room, it's hard to fit more than 8 people comfortably. And so if you have a couple families up at the cabin for the weekend, some people are getting left out, right? So we do install a number of theater rooms every year, but what we're seeing more commonly is more of what we refer to as a media room, right? So a lower level, often for lighting reasons, family room, that type of scenario where it's a multi-purpose space where a large portion of it is dedicated to either a large TV or sometimes still projection based on the room layout and how we can control lighting and stuff. But then more encompassing seating and a space where not everybody has to be sitting in front of the television, but can still be a part of the experience, either playing pool or hanging out at a bar or something rather than just being dedicated to sitting in front of the television or projection screen like you would in a closed off theater room per se. So a multi-purpose room that we refer to as a media room is what we're utilizing or installing more of.
And so when it comes to TVs or projection centers, this might seem like a crazy question, but is bigger always better?
Pretty much, yeah. And I say that unironically because it's the only limitation previously to size has been resolution, right? Because at a certain point with a lower resolution, either lower resolution content or older style projectors that weren't high def or were only a 720p projector like the early iterations of HD, you would end up, the human eye has great capabilities, right? So in earlier systems, you could resolve more detail and you would see the imperfections in the image. Now, resolutions are surpassing human visual acuity, as we refer to it. And so size is no longer an issue aside from, aesthetic reasons. Sometimes an 85-inch TV is too big, sometimes it's too small. So it really is a size is better. And when you're looking at it from the perspective of immersion, when you watch a movie, that's what you're doing. You're immersing yourself in the experience. You're living out the story that the director wanted to present to you, and you're escaping reality. And when you're doing that, the bigger the screen is, the more of your perception of the world around you is encompassed by that image, and it helps you join in on the experience more than a smaller screen would. And that's why theaters are so engrossing. That's why people go to the movie theater, is because they get to experience a 50-foot image that takes up 80% of their vision, right? They're becoming that experience. So in a home environment, it's easy to put a very, very large screen, and it's almost impossible. It's definitely possible to be too big, but it's really hard to be too big. The only time size becomes an issue is budget. That's the only time.
Oh, sure.
Because especially when you're dealing with projection systems, when you get to a certain size screen, your run-of-the-mill let's say $10,000, $15,000 projectors, which is obviously a very expensive projector, but that's the majority of projectors that are sold in the home environment are under $5,000, and then even fewer are, 10 or 20. But even at that price range, you do have a size limitation because you stop having the ability to properly light up a certain size screen. And so then you end up having to spend quite a bit on a projector to properly illuminate your screen. So it can be an issue, but usually only from a budget perspective.
So would you say that resolution is more important than size, or are they about equal when you're considering that?
Well, they go hand in hand, right? So if you're sitting down to watch television, and you're sitting 10 feet away from a TV, you could literally have a 96-inch screen, and as long as you're looking at 4K content, it won't look bad, 10 feet away. But if you're sitting 10 feet away and you have a 43-inch TV and you feel like you need 4K or 8K resolution, your eyes actually can't tell the difference because the pixels and the detail are so small. So size is even more important in a media room or a theater room environment, because resolution can be utilized. Because if you have such a small screen at a seating distance of 10 or 12 feet, you're just kind of throwing money away because the eye just can't tell the difference. So size actually matters more.
Then it does.
Yeah.
So what does that mean, the K? I think we hear that a lot, 4K, 8K. What's the difference, and why is bigger better on that?
That's solely a marketing thing. So technology is obviously always advancing, and these manufacturers have to find a way for them to convey what the capabilities of the display technology is to the everyday consumer.
Sure.
So 4K actually has very little to do with anything technical. It's just it's a way of conveying how many pixels are in the screen. And it's actually kind of confusing because a 4K television is actually 4096 by 2160 is the resolution, which is 8 million pixels if you do the math. It's a lot, but then when you think 8K, well, why didn't they just call 4K 8K? Because 8K is 8 million pixels, right? Well, 8K is actually 4 times 4K, and it gets messy. So yeah, but you can see how Sony, if they were to advertise their TV and they go, oh, it's 4096 by 2160, people would be like, what is that? Everybody else is 4K. Why are you 4096? It's just, there had to be this common denominator of how to describe it. And they kind of faltered with that with previous lower resolutions. So when HD first came out, HD is 1280 by 720, or just about 1 million pixels. That's the minimum requirement to be high definition.
Okay. Then
they went to what's called full HD, which was 1920 by 1080. And they tried to market it as full HD or 1080p.
Yes.
And it's really just the marketing team bowing down to the engineering team and trying to figure out how to sell a product and how to convey the capabilities to a consumer. 4K is ubiquitous. It's in everything. You can't get a TV that's less than 4K nowadays, unless you're talking like a 32-inch. But even then, Sony's got a 4K 30. I think they have a 4K 32-inch coming out this year. That's going to be $800. It's basically a professional monitor that they've made available to the residential market. But yeah, 4K is everywhere, and 8K is a thing. But that's a whole separate topic that for another video, because in a lot of cases, people, getting back to the size thing, even sitting 6 feet away from a 65-inch, it's hard to actually utilize 4K resolution because we both wear glasses. We have deficiency in our vision. Human eyes can only see so much. And so at a certain point, resolution becomes unnecessary when you're limited in size.
So then let's talk about sound. What's important to consider when you're putting together a media room? What is important to remember about sound?
Oh, that's
another video too.
that's a big topic. But I would say just figure out where your importance are aesthetic wise, or where aesthetics are in your equation. Because from a budget perspective, if aesthetics are first, you're going to spend approximately at least 150% more, sometimes even more than that, to get the same performance out of a speaker that would otherwise be like a box speaker. So if you said, I want in-wall speakers, and you want them to sound the same as a traditional bookshelf or a tower speaker would, sure, that same in-wall speaker with the same performance is going to cost 150 to 200% more or more, depending on what you're looking for. So if you want a $10,000 audio system, but you want it to be aesthetically pleasing and you don't want to deal with speakers sitting on the floor, bookshelf speakers, expect to spend $15,000 to get the same performance otherwise. Or just be happy with the fact that the performance might be less to spend the same amount of money, basically.
And what about lighting? Is lighting an important consideration with that too?
Well, lighting's important if you're doing projection. And and that's the trade-off, right? If you're doing a media room, not like a dedicated theater room that you can have ultimate darkness, know that if you can't control the lighting, that you're going to not be able to fully utilize the projection system, or there's going to be some downsides. The most important part with lighting for a projection system is any light that directly affects the screen. So if you have the ability to turn off or individually control the lights, the circuits of lights closest to the screen, then you'll have a much easier time of utilizing the system. But if you can't control those lights, then it's going to be pretty unfortunate. In the backdrop here, this right here, I'm trying to point it out, I'm having a hard time. That's a projection system, but it's been, the image has been altered to show, a picture on it. If the lighting in this room existed when the projection system was turned on, it would not look like that. It would be very washed out. But if you see, I'm going to try to point again, over there,
there you go.
There's motorized shades here that can be pulled over the doors that turn this main level living room into a theater room effectively. So you can have the media room and have a projection system, but there's lots of things that you have to do to kind of meet the darkness requirements to fully utilize a projection system. And that's why large TVs are great, because if you are fine with a smaller image and maybe you're not as concerned about the immersion that a large projection system gives you, then you can have a 65, 75, 85, 96 or bigger television and not have to bow down to the lighting and lighting requirements.
So we're thinking TV, good sound system, the right lighting, maybe some motorized shades. That sounds like a lot of remotes to me. How do we?
It doesn't have to be.
Yeah, how do we do better than that? How do we control that? Like figuring out like the good old fashioned all-in-one remotes.
Yeah,
there's got to be a better way, right?
Yeah. So regardless of the size of system that we install, even if it's just a basic entertainment system, which might have a television, a cable or satellite box, some sort of streaming device like an Apple TV or a Roku player. If you have surround sound, now you have an amplifier. You of course have the television, and then you might have some other devices. You might have an auxiliary connection to plug a computer in, or I mean, you name it. There's lots of ancillary devices. If you do gaming, you might have a console. So now you're talking potentially 6 or 7 remotes to operate everything. But let's say you want to tie in lighting and shades and all these other things. It gets complicated. So we'll install an automation system, and we can eliminate the need for all of those remotes. And your experience with that system is boiled down to the functions of the system. So if you want to watch Blu-ray, there's a function labeled Blu-ray, and you just touch Blu-ray, that turns the TV on, turns the surround sound receiver on. It might dim the lights, it might close the shades, it'll turn the surround sound receiver on, it'll turn the TV on, it'll make sure both of those devices are in the correct input, and it can even set like a minimum volume level. Or it can turn the thermostat down to a cooler temperature because you want to snuggle up in a blanket or something. Yeah. We can eliminate the need for all of those remotes and all of the steps required to use them for you and or your guests, and provide it into a single interface.
And it probably makes for a better looking system too, right? If you can use something like a rack.
Yeah, so the need for an equipment rack really depends on the complexity of the system. Sometimes all of the components can just fit into a basic entertainment center or some sort of custom cabinetry or furniture, but it really depends on how many components are required and where they need to go to determine the need for something like that.
So how practical is an outdoor theater? How is it worth it to invest in something like that?
In Minnesota, it's not very practical at all. It also just it depends on how a part of the house or the structure you want it to be. I mean, there's all sorts of solutions for large screens that can rise up out of the ground and have an in-ground enclosure that hides everything. The most practical application for an outdoor theater would be if you had some sort of external structure or a part of the house that was on the outside of the house, or obviously joined on the house, but like a cabana or something like that. And then you could have a screen in there that would drop down and be visible through an opening of some sorts, and then the projector is inside, and then we would deploy something called rear projection, where the image is actually shown from the back of the screen and actually flipped, so that when you're viewing it from outside, it looks normal. But that would be the most practical application. We installed lots of outdoor TVs that are, usually they're underneath some sort of covering, a porch or something like that. And that's very practical, because then you can be sitting anywhere, and then we just tie the audio from the television into some sort of landscape audio system so that the audio is evenly distributed wherever you might be out on the patio. But your traditional projector and screen, it can be done, but there's a lot of downsides outside, specifically related to the sun, that are hard. But if you just want to use it at night, then it makes things a little bit easier.
Yeah, that brings up my next question. Are there certain kinds of TVs you have to have outside, or certain kinds of projectors? What's important to know about that?
There really isn't much for outdoor projection. There aren't really manufacturers that make outdoor projectors, because there's just so many elements that you basically can't use a projection system during the day in almost all scenarios, because of how much ambient light exists from the sun. But as far as televisions, yes, absolutely. There are actual outdoor rated televisions, both from the aspect of the TV being sealed for limiting dust and bugs and things like that from getting into it. But then there's more extreme versions that will control the temperature of the television when there's direct sunlight, and specific coatings that are over the screen, because the sun, again, absolutely destroys electronics. And specifically LCD screens, which are most common in televisions now, the sun will actually erode the crystal structure of the television to the point where it's unusable, like it destroys it. So there's one of the companies that we work with most commonly is called Sunbright, and they have 3 primary lines of televisions, and they're all around how much sunlight the television is exposed to. And then when you get at the top end, they're designed to be in full sunlight, but if you have a veranda or something that can cover the television, then you can use a more basic version that's not expecting to be in sunlight.
So when you're working with a homeowner on, developing an ideal media center, what does that consultation look like? What does that involve?
Well, the first thing that we do is we have them come into our office and experience what it is that we have here. We have a full living room with a fully integrated entertainment system with a large screen display. And we have a very nice sound system here. We have a fully installed in-wall speakers. We have what's referred to as a Dolby Atmos setup, where there's actually height channels, so speakers above you that we call the voice of God. And then it's a 5.1.2 surround sound system. So we have somebody come in and experience what a really good high-end audio system sounds like, and then they can determine if that meets their needs, does it meet their budget, and where they want to be in relation to that, because it's definitely not as high end as you can go. Home theaters and audio systems are literally the sky is the limit, but it's a series of diminishing returns. So we view what we have as a very high end system, and anything above it is an improvement, but it's often not a good value proposition. So we start with what we have here and let people know what a high end system looks like, what it costs, how it operates, what it looks like, and then we let them tell us what they like out of it, what they don't like out of it, and then we design something to fit their space and their budget.
Yeah, I've been in the experience center and it's awesome. And one of the cool features in there that I realized we haven't talked about is acoustics and those acoustics panels. Why is that important to consider in a room?
That's a very broad topic, but basically what ends up happening is when sound escapes the speaker, it doesn't go straight to your ear. Just like light,
right.
sound bounces everywhere, right? And some rooms just, I mean, by default, that sound doesn't go away right away. It reverberates. And so what ends up happening is you get both the sound from the speaker, but then also the sound that reverberates hit your ear, but at different times. Now, psychologically, you can't directly pick out which sound wave or which frequency is entering your ear because it all joins together. But what happens in your brain has a hard time processing it.
Sure.
So if you have a room that the sound doesn't die down or has a long reverberation time, it actually causes fatigue. It actually makes your brain work harder. Think of like going to a restaurant that's very noisy. If you're there for an hour and you're having a conversation with your partner or a friend or whoever, it's not uncommon to leave a space like that and actually feel tired.
Yes.
And you just don't know why. It's like, why do I feel lethargic now? And it wasn't the wine, or it might have been the wine, but a lot of it is actually your body or your brain, and conversely, your body supporting your brain, trying to process the sound from the person you're talking to mixed in with all of the other audio that you don't want to hear. Your brain has to filter out what it needs to hear versus what it doesn't want to hear. And just like when you're watching a movie, when a movie is created, the audio is often captured or created at separate times, but when it's presented to you in a way that it's supposed to correspond with what's happening on the screen. And so your brain is going, okay, well, I'm seeing something happening and I'm hearing something happening, but then it's also getting everything else mixed in at different times. So acoustical panels are there to reduce the amount of reflections so that what you're hearing is both what's supposed to be heard from the screen, but then it's also going to help filter out the sound that comes in later, both that you shouldn't hear, right? But then also preventing that colored sound, which is what happens to sound when it bounces off of a surface. It changes what it sounds like. And it helps keep that colored sound from impacting what you should hear, which is directly from the speaker. Now, you should definitely have a mix of both, but too much of both is the problem. So we will provide acoustical panels in varying colors or paintable colors or whatever to match the decor to help reduce those reverberations and those secondary reflections, is what we refer to them as, and keep more of what you should be hearing directly from the speaker.
Yeah, I think we had talked about this in another video, but that kind of shows why it's important when, like, let's say in a new build, when you're working with your contractor, the room that you think might be a good media room is probably, maybe it's not, because
Right.
of how the space or the sound is going to fill. And that's why it's important to know that ahead of time, right?
It's all expectations, right? So if you want to sit 10 people, is your room capable of supporting that? So we take that guidance from the customer and help them determine what their end goals are and how to match it to their space, and if something needs to be changed in their budget or in the size or the shape of the room to accommodate what they ultimately want to do.
Well, and as we all know, it's probably, a lot more cost effective to do that before the walls are up than, you can always obviously do media centers in existing builds, but it's probably far less expensive to just do it the first time.
Well, it's just most important if your room is dedicated to some sort of media function, especially in a theater room, because there's so much that goes into the layout of a theater room, both from a seating perspective and speaker placement, and then you have things like sight lines with the projector. Can people in the back row see over the front row? And is the screen going to have to be too far up for the people in the front row to accommodate that? And how far is the projector over somebody's head? Where is the projector going to go? I mean, there's so many things that tie in. If you change the speakers, if you change the screen size, what does that do to the sight line? It's so intertwined that to not involve somebody in that process early on, just it does the room disservice.
So how would someone get started with you? What's the best way to get started on that?
Just to contact us as soon as possible, especially if they're putting in a room that is so critical, like a theater room. Just call us. Our number is 218-330-4140. Call us anytime. Bring your floor plans in. We can look at things. We can offer some insight, offer some ideas, some suggestions, and just take things from there.
Yeah, and that's why I think it's so critical to get into that experience center and really figure out how it all can look and work, and like you said, meet your expectations about that.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you for those awesome pieces of advice. I think that that's really critical in helping homeowners understand how that all works, and that there's more thought than slapping a TV up on a wall and hoping
Right.
for the best. That there's really a lot more thought for an exceptional experience that you can have.
Yep.
All right, awesome. We'll see you again soon.
Thanks, Lori.